archaeologists behind the discovery of King Richard III's remains under a car park in Leicester, well, they were back at the site today to begin work on another new dig.
King Richard III.
King Richard III's.
King Richard III.
King Richard III. King Richard III.
King Richard III.
For over 500 years, the story of King Richard III was believed to be settled. A defeated monarch, a forgotten grave, and then, suddenly, rediscovered beneath a modern parking lot. DNA testing confirmed his identity, and history declared the case closed. But what if that wasn't the end of the story? Only the beginning. In 2026, new AI-assisted genetic analysis revisited the original evidence. This time, it didn't just confirm history, it challenged it. When researchers compared expanded European lineage datasets with Richard's remains, something unexpected emerged. Inconsistencies no one had accounted for. The DNA still links to Richard III, but not in the clean, direct way historians once believed. Certain genetic markers don't fully align with the officially recorded Plantagenet lineage. Others hint at possible breaks in inheritance, unexplained variations, and questions that should not exist if the historical record is correct. This is no longer a simple identification case. It's becoming a fracture in the royal bloodline itself. Now scientists are divided. Historians are re-examining long-held assumptions. And institutions that once declared the mystery solved are suddenly choosing their words very carefully. Because if these findings are correct, it doesn't just change Richard III, it changes the story of an entire dynasty. Hit like and subscribe, because what's being uncovered now may rewrite medieval history as we know it. It changes not just who sat on the throne, but who was ever meant to rule England in the first place. The Leicester miracle. At first, it almost sounds like a cruel joke. A king lost beneath a modern parking lot. For over 5 centuries, that's where the story of King Richard III was thought to end. He was the last English monarch to fall in battle, struck down at Bosworth Field in 1485. His death marked the collapse of the Plantagenet dynasty and brought the brutal Wars of the Roses to a close. To the victorious Tudors, it wasn't enough to win on the battlefield. They needed to control the narrative. Richard's body was stripped, placed across a horse, and paraded through the streets of Leicester. It was deliberate humiliation, a public declaration that his reign and his bloodline were finished. He was then buried quickly, without honor, in a simple grave at Greyfriars Church. And after that, history slowly forgot him. Years later, during the Reformation, the church was demolished. Its stones were reused, the land was resold, rebuilt, and eventually covered in roads and concrete. The exact location of his grave vanished. Over time, rumors spread that his remains had been disturbed and thrown into the River Soar. For centuries, Richard III was considered lost forever. He survived only as a Shakespearean villain, a twisted king of legend. Until one woman refused to accept that story. Philippa Langley, a screenwriter, became obsessed with Richard III, but not the monster history described. She saw something else, a man shaped by Tudor propaganda. She spent years studying ancient maps, layering old Leicester over the modern city, searching for any trace of the past. Again and again, her findings pointed to one completely ordinary place, a municipal car park. Experts dismissed her. She was told the grave was gone, the bones lost, the idea pointless. But she didn't stop. Eventually, she convinced the University of Leicester to take a chance. In August 2012, archaeologists cut into the asphalt of a parking lot and began digging into the soil beneath. The media laughed at the project, calling it a wasted effort. But on day one, they found human bones, At first, it meant little. The site had once been a churchyard, but as excavation continued, the story began to change. Skeleton 1 emerged. The body had been buried in a shallow, careless grave, too small for the individual. The head was awkwardly positioned, tilted upward in an unnatural way. This wasn't a respectful burial. It was rushed, rough, almost insulting. Exactly the kind of treatment you'd expect for a defeated king. The remains belonged to a man in his early 30s. Richard III was 32 when he died. Then came the injuries. 10 wounds were identified across the skeleton, 8 of them on the skull alone. This wasn't a single killing blow. It was violent, chaotic, and relentless, likely inflicted after his helmet was removed. One strike shattered the base of the skull. Another, likely from a halberd, pierced the top of the head entirely. This was a king overwhelmed in battle, cut down and finished in the final chaos. But the most surprising discovery wasn't the injuries, it was the spine. The skeleton showed severe scoliosis, a pronounced sideways curvature. For centuries, Tudor accounts described Richard as a hunchback, portraying him as physically deformed. The bones revealed the truth was exaggerated, but not entirely invented. The condition would have made one shoulder visibly higher than the other, matching some historical descriptions. Suddenly, old records started to make sense. Further scientific analysis added even more detail. Isotope testing of teeth and bones showed a diet rich in wine and seafood, luxuries reserved for the elite in the 15th century. Every piece of evidence pointed in the same direction. But evidence alone wasn't enough. Science needed certainty, something undeniable. They needed DNA. The bones had already told a powerful story, but the final answer lay hidden in genetics. And what they discovered would confirm the king and then fracture the story all over again. Getting DNA after 500 years is extremely difficult. Ancient DNA breaks down over time into tiny fragments like shattered glass. Worse, it can easily be contaminated by modern human contact. Just a skin cell, a hair, even a breath. To prevent this, the team led by geneticist Dr. Turi King worked in ultra-sterile cleanroom conditions, wearing full protective suits like astronauts. They carefully extracted DNA from the tooth and femur, 2 of the best preserved sources of genetic material. Their goal was simple: find a living relative and compare the results. Here's where genetics becomes powerful. Most DNA reshuffles every generation, making long-term tracing nearly impossible. But there are 2 exceptions that remain stable across centuries. One of them is mitochondrial DNA, mtDNA. Unlike normal DNA, mtDNA is passed only from mother to child, unchanged across generations. That means a direct maternal line can carry the same genetic signature for hundreds, even thousands of years. Richard III had no surviving legitimate children, but his lineage could still be traced through his family. His sister, Anne of York, became the key. Genealogists spent years tracing her female line across 17 generations, carefully following each maternal link through history. Eventually, they identified 2 living descendants: Michael Ibsen, a Canadian-born furniture maker living in London, and Wendy Duldig, another distant relative. Both agreed to provide DNA samples. The lab then compared their mtDNA with the genetic material extracted from the skeleton. The result was extraordinary, a perfect match. They shared the same rare mitochondrial signature, known as haplogroup J, found in only a small fraction of Europeans. The probability of coincidence was extremely low. Combined with the skeleton's injuries, age, burial context, and scoliosis, the evidence became overwhelming. In February 2013, the University of Leicester announced the conclusion to the world. The skeleton in the car park was, beyond reasonable doubt, King Richard III. The mystery was solved. But science wasn't finished yet. There was one more test, one final layer of truth. The Y chromosome. Unlike mitochondrial DNA, the Y chromosome is passed strictly from father to son, forming a direct paternal signature across generations. If Richard III's male lineage matched his supposed royal descendants, it would complete the genetic confirmation. Researchers tracked living male line descendants of Edward III's lineage, including men connected to the House of Beaufort. Samples were taken, data was analyzed, and the result was shocking. A total mismatch, no connection, no alignment, not even close. And with that, the story didn't just end, it split open again. The king's paternal lineage had been shattered. Somewhere across the 19 generations separating Richard III from his modern descendants, history had quietly recorded a father, who may not have been the biological father at all. And that single break changed everything. This wasn't a minor genetic irregularity. It was evidence of a hidden rupture in the royal bloodline. What scientists clinically describe as a false paternity event, but in reality, it means something far more explosive. Infidelity buried deep inside a dynasty that ruled England. The DNA was pointing to a lie. The only question left was, where did it happen? The Plantagenet problem. When the Y chromosome results were first released, they sent shockwaves through the historical world. It wasn't just a mismatch, it was a biological contradiction. The data suggested that at some point in the lineage, a child was raised as legitimate royalty, while carrying a different biological father than the one recorded in history. And this wasn't just family drama hidden behind castle walls. It struck at the core of English monarchy itself. The Plantagenet claim to power, the foundation of their right to rule during the Wars of the Roses, depended entirely on an unbroken male line, passed from father to son, supposedly ordained by divine right. But this discovery suggested that the sacred bloodline may not have been pure at all. At some point, a noblewoman may have conceived a child outside her marriage, unknowingly rewriting the future of England. So the real question became unavoidable. Where exactly did the line break? Two possibilities, two futures, a landmark 2014 study published in Nature Communications handled the finding with extreme caution. And that caution mattered. The researchers outlined two possible explanations. First possibility, the break occurred after Richard III. In this scenario, the disruption happened somewhere along the Somerset lineage, the modern descendants of the Dukes of Beaufort. This would be inconvenient, but contained, a private rupture in a noble family tree. Richard's own legitimacy would remain intact, and history would stay mostly unchanged. A scandal, but not a revolution. But the second possibility was far more dangerous. The break may have happened before Richard III, and if that were true, everything collapsed. It would mean Richard himself, and potentially his brothers, including King Edward IV, were not biologically descended from the father's history assigned to them. In other words, Richard III may have fought and died for a crown he was never genetically entitled to inherit. And it went even further. Edward IV, father of the infamous princes in the Tower, would also be called into question. That would mean the entire Wars of the Roses wasn't just a political struggle, it was a 30-year civil war, built on a mistaken assumption about bloodline legitimacy. The House of York's claim to the throne could have been fundamentally flawed from the beginning. A truth too explosive to pinpoint. The research team, led by Dr. Turi King, presented both scenarios with equal scientific weight. But there was a problem. They couldn't determine where the break actually occurred, not with the tools available at the time. So the conclusion remained deliberately neutral. Somewhere across 19 generations, the Y chromosome lineage had fractured. That uncertainty changed everything, and nothing at the same time, because in public interpretation, the discovery became simple. They found Richard III. The scandalous implications of the Y chromosome mismatch were quietly pushed into the background, treated as an unresolved anomaly rather than a historical earthquake. But in reality, it wasn't a footnote. It was a question that struck at kings, crowns, and legitimacy itself. And perhaps that's why it was never fully confronted. The hidden probability. Modern genetic research suggests that false paternity events occur in roughly 1 to 2% of births per generation. That may sound small, but across 19 generations, over 500 years, the likelihood of at least one such event becomes extremely high. So statistically, a break was almost expected. But this wasn't just any family. This was a royal dynasty built on the idea that blood equals right. And that's where the irony becomes almost impossible to ignore. Richard III himself challenged the legitimacy of his nephews, the princes in the Tower, claiming they had no rightful claim to the throne. Now, centuries later, his own genetic story suggested that the entire system of legitimacy he died defending may have been unstable from the very beginning. The cold case reopens. For more than a decade, the controversy remained frozen in time. A scientific result, with world-shaking implications, left unresolved. The data sat there, untouched, like a sealed verdict, waiting for a new form of justice, until 2026. That's when a new international collaboration launched, the Royal Bloodline Genomic Reanalysis Project. Researchers from the University of Leicester joined forces with AI geneticists from Harvard and the Max Planck Institute, aiming to do what earlier science could not: locate the exact point where the royal Y chromosome line broke. But this time, they weren't just using traditional genetics. They brought in artificial intelligence. AI enters the royal bloodline. The new system was radically more advanced than anything used in 2014. AI-driven genomic models were trained on vast European ancestry databases containing millions of genetic markers drawn from medieval and modern populations. These neural networks could detect patterns invisible to human researchers, reconstruct fragmented ancient DNA sequences, and map genetic drift across centuries with unprecedented precision. The system didn't just analyze DNA, it learned from it. It also integrated protein-level reconstruction of ancient remains and epigenetic modeling, allowing scientists to infer biological traits and lineage patterns far beyond standard sequencing. But even the AI needed a starting point. To identify the true Plantagenet baseline, it required a reference from a male line relative who lived before any possible disruption. So researchers turned to one of the most critical figures in royal lineage, John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster. With permission from Westminster Abbey, a microscopic sample was taken from his remains. The son of Edward III and a direct ancestor of both York and Lancaster claims. His DNA would serve as the foundation, the genetic anchor for the entire royal tree. If anyone represented the original Plantagenet Y chromosome signature, it was him. And with that, the AI began its most ambitious task yet, tracing the bloodline of kings back through time, searching for the exact moment history may have been rewritten at the genetic level. The latest findings don't just rewrite who ruled England, they rewrite who was ever supposed to rule at all. Because what the AI uncovered wasn't a small correction to history. It was a collapse of the entire royal bloodline story. The breaking point in the bloodline. The deep AI genetic analysis of the Somerset descendants delivered the first shock. With 99.9% certainty, the system confirmed their Y chromosome line had remained completely intact since the 15th century. Every mutation point, every genetic marker, every inheritance pattern. Perfect continuity, which immediately eliminated the safe explanation proposed in 2014. The break wasn't on their side. It had to be elsewhere. Then came the second breakthrough. Researchers fed the newly obtained ancient DNA from John of Gaunt into the AI system. Millions of simulations ran across expanded European lineage databases, and the result changed everything. The AI confirmed that John of Gaunt's Y chromosome matched the modern Somerset line exactly. That single result was explosive, because it meant the Somerset lineage wasn't the break. It was the original Plantagenet male line, which left only one conclusion. The non-matching Y chromosome belonged to Richard III's line. The rupture had to be within his immediate ancestry. The exact point of collapse. The 2026 AI-driven study didn't just suggest this possibility, it calculated it with near-complete certainty. By cross-referencing medieval genetic datasets, reconstructing fragmented sequences, and eliminating every alternate branch, the system pinpointed the break between Richard, Earl of Cambridge, and Richard III himself. And suddenly, the focus shifted onto one man, Richard, Duke of York, father of King Edward IV and Richard III. And that's when a centuries-old rumor suddenly snapped into place. The rumor that history tried to forget. During the Wars of the Roses, York's enemies spread a scandalous claim. They alleged that Richard, Duke of York, was not truly the son of Richard of Conisbrough, Earl of Cambridge. Instead, they pointed to his mother, Cecily Neville, suggesting she had conceived a child while her husband was away at war. They even named a supposed lover, a common archer named Blayborn. At the time, it was dismissed as political propaganda, a smear campaign designed to weaken Yorkist legitimacy. But now, in light of 2026 AI genetic analysis, that old rumor takes on a disturbing new weight. It may not have been fiction after all. It may have been early history, hiding in plain sight. The truth that changes everything. If the Duke of York was not biologically legitimate, then everything built upon him collapses. His son, Edward IV, the warrior King of York, would have no genetic right to the throne. His children, including the princes in the Tower, would be considered illegitimate under the very system that defined medieval kingship. And Richard III himself, who justified taking the crown by questioning his nephew's legitimacy, would also be part of that same broken line. The entire House of York, its wars, its victories, its claims, would rest on a single inherited error in identity. A 30-year civil war, tens of thousands dead, entire noble families erased, battlefields like Towton, where the bloodshed reached unprecedented levels in English history, all fought over a right to rule that, genetically speaking, may never have existed. The truth they tried to contain. The 2014 study didn't hide the data, but it softened the impact. It acknowledged a break in the Y chromosome line, but refused to define where it happened. Somewhere across 19 generations, they said. A scientific uncertainty, but in reality, it left the most dangerous question unanswered. And that ambiguity allowed history to move on. People celebrated the discovery of Richard III's remains, but the deeper implication, the legitimacy crisis, was quietly left unresolved. Because the truth was too destabilizing. It didn't just question a king. It questioned an entire dynasty. What the AI finally revealed. Now, in 2026, artificial intelligence has removed that ambiguity. It didn't estimate. It didn't speculate. It calculated. And the conclusion is unavoidable. The Yorkist claim to the throne may have originated from a false paternity event in the Duke of York's lineage, which means a single hidden moment in the 14th century may have reshaped centuries of English history. The final question. So if England's royal bloodline was built on a genetic break, what does that mean for everything that followed? And more importantly, if the foundation was wrong from the beginning, was any of it ever truly legitimate? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep historical mysteries.